Hello, welcome to another episode of Property-Pxrn Stars, the premium property podcast, brought to you by your hosts, David Lindley.
And I'm Matt Giggs. So, David's looking at me with, it's not love, but it's actually, I've invited a special guest with us today, Ella McCrystal. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Ella is a psychotherapist and she's an author, podcast host of the New Mind podcast.
It is, correct.
So check it out on the likes of Apple, Spotify, those kind of different channels, YouTube.
I'm desperate for some subscribers.
More. Go to YouTube, And I'm a firm believer that we need to stretch our guests across different platforms, but interlinking them back to what the premium property market and agents and business owners and entrepreneurs and CEOs really could value from in terms of advice. So having been a follower of yours for some time, and I think it was due to a young man called Scott Poulter. You had him on the show. There you go. There's the link. He used to work for me. I recruited him into Taylor's estate agents in Milton Keynes.
Oh, that's the link.
There's the link. God, this is probably going back to like early 2000 or something like that. And I was kind of mentoring Scott a little bit along his first part of the journey into agency. He's quite a character. And he's gone through quite a transformation in his life.
Yeah.
And then he shared a podcast that he was on a little while back. It's probably a year ago or something. I can't even remember now. But he was talking about his journey and it was on your podcast.
Oh, wow.
So
he was very open, bless him.
He is.
What was his story, just out of curiosity?
He has had a battle with addiction and it was quite severe. So I know there's a lot of podcasts on that subject, but then he started something called the Man Cave and he started which has got quite big now, and he's got something called Lads App now. So it's really about men's health. So yes, it's about his journey, which is quite hard hitting, but then what he's done next. And he's quite open. Cool. He still struggles every now and then, you know. It's a very interesting episode, actually.
Yeah, so check that out. Check Ella's podcast out as well. But you're on ours today.
Yes.
Thank you for travelling over from the salubrious area of Northampton.
It's definitely a pleasure to be here.
And into Canary Wharf, into the studio today to meet David and I. So tell us a little bit about your journey from, let's say, your early years, what's kind of formed your career in psychotherapy. Give us a bit of a breakdown for our listeners.
Okay, so without sounding too controversial, the history is, as you will know from following me, is I was brought up in a very toxic family system. Yeah. So was sexually abused by my dad. Ended up having to leave home very, very early. He went to prison, came back out of prison, moved back in. So I didn't have much of a choice but to leave. And the next years that followed were difficult, poor mental health. And I really struggled.
How old were you at this point?
I was 16 when I left.
Right.
Okay. So between the ages of 11 to 16, it was tough. But particularly from 16 into early 20s, there just wasn't the services then. I'm 46. So what we look at now in terms of mental health, we didn't even talk about it. You wouldn't have even heard, I mean, you'll remember, you wouldn't have even heard people talk about being anxious, let alone, anything else. No. So I had some poor experiences with healthcare providers and I guess started to get to the point of rock bottom and realised that I only had myself. There was no family system around me, no money, nothing. And I started to look at people around me that were doing well. And I realised they had quite a different language to me. They didn't seem to have this negative perception of self. They seemed to look at things very differently. And I don't know if that's because of their belief systems or because they did have money, but there was something different about the way they thought. And I kind of started to just observe to try and find a way out of rock bottom because that was all I could do. And from that point, I thought, you know what, I'm going to retrain. I'd gone into nursing and various different things, but I was just struggling. I just didn't feel that there was a place for me. And then I thought I could see actually the way the NHS was going. So I went to train in psychotherapy in the hope that I could be a version of a therapist that I hadn't been able to get hold of.
Nice.
And that's where the journey into business starts. And because of the way the NHS was going, it kind of forced me to think about private practice. And then that led on to the next steps, which is now I've got my own clinic, which I own as a property as well as the business itself. So each step was informed by not having anything and seeing the way other people were working. So it's kind of that curiosity. And I am a curious person, so I think that really helps.
For someone who doesn't know anything about this, like me, what is a psychotherapist?
So I think that's a very good question, actually, because most people don't ask that. It's not counselling.
Most people are a bit more better informed than I am.
No, it's because most people kind of don't want to ask. I think they just think, I should know this. So I think a lot of people think it's just counselling, which is you talk, I listen. But it's very tool-based. So I use something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
I read a bit about that.
Yeah, very good trauma treatment.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, years ago, when it first came about, when it was first getting popular, because it's been around for about 30, 40 years, I just thought, this sounds like a load of rubbish. I was already a clinical hypnotherapist by that point, and I was quite dismissive of it. But then as times moved on and I'd had EMDR myself for my own trauma, I thought, this is brilliant. And it really is. It's a game changer. And then parts therapy as well. So Internal Family Systems by Richard Schwartz. Really, it's a mixed modality process for me personally. I like to use tools. I like to think of the brain as something that can be rebuilt and repatterned. It's not just, we know this from neuroplasticity, it's not stuck. You can change lots of things about your brain. You just need someone to help you design it. So I think of myself as the designer of the brain.
Wow.
And I have to work with you to be, we have to be a team, but we can design that together or redesign it together.
Wow,
That's
cool.
a great answer.
Yeah, great answer, yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to say that at any best of guesses, but
I wasn't going to ask you, Matt.
we've had, I don't know, however many downloads, but I would imagine everybody that's listened or observed this podcast has some kind of challenge in their life.
Yeah.
And I know in the people industry, it's an emotional industry that we're in.
Yeah.
I was on a call this morning with a client. Obviously, I won't go into much detail, but there's domestic abuse going on in her home, and he's moved out. And we're trying to manage this situation where he's now controlling the situation with a sale. He's trying to put the foot on the brakes to stop the sale going there, so he can control the outcome.
Financial abuse.
It's really like, but I mean, as an agent, I'm wearing my agent hat.
Yeah.
You're dealing with clients' emotions. You're dealing with your emotions at home. You're dealing with your own emotions. You're dealing with your team's emotions. And I really feel like, having gone through therapy myself and dipped my toe, if people didn't know this, into psychotherapy probably about 15, 16 years ago, when I was going through some challenges, and how it helped me to see things in a completely different way and how to replace some of those feelings with different strategies and tools. I'm always a great believer, since I've gone into the personal development journey, of sharing what I've done and being authentic about it, but also to actually realise that a lot of personal development can be around your skills and your knowledge and experience. But even with all of that going in the right direction, if you haven't tackled certain internal past-related challenges and problems or traumas, you're not going to unlock your true potential. Mm-hmm. Now, I might be wrong in that, but I have a real firm belief in that. So for the listeners that are listening to this today, stay really tuned to what we're going to cover, because there's a lot that I think estate agents have to handle. And we've talked about the leadership examples. Managing yourself is the biggest leadership example that we can look at. Self-leadership, self-talk, self-validation, all of those different things. When just kind of covering that base off just then, how does that sound to you?
Yeah.
From a perspective of, I was in the tube, I was on the cat. Everywhere you look, everybody has something going on.
Yeah.
And it's that part that I want people to just create some awareness with today, that it's okay. We're here, we're normal, we're human. Actually, being a human means you have got some kind of past and some situations to tackle. So how do people create that level of awareness to begin with?
First of all, you would have heard me say about IFS, which is the parts work, is that no one person is a linear thing. There's not just this one person that you could say, Dave is ABC, because that's the front bit of Dave. Behind the scenes are all these other parts running the show. And behind those parts is core self. So you were talking about the self-validation and all of that. If you aren't in touch with core self and you don't understand what that is, all of those parts are running the show for you. So if you've got past experiences where you've had to step up and be angry, or you've had to step up and be controlling, talking about the domestic abuse situation there, that guy that is doing that, by the way, is somebody who is incredibly insecure and feels incredibly threatened by what's going up. But he's stepping up into a part that I'll call a manager or a protector that is trying to run the show to stop that part of the vulnerable part being seen. So we have layers, exiled parts, which are the vulnerable parts where you hold shame and fear. Then there's another layer which might be anxiety, control, those sorts of things. If anxiety and control isn't helping to keep the vulnerable bit at bay, you step up into anger and those more maladaptive parts. If they've worked for you previously, you'll continue to use them because repetition is recognition. So we wire in those parts of self and we see them as necessary for survival. So often when someone's doing that, they're in survival mode and they're not in touch with core self at all because they don't feel like core self is enough. So that's what it all comes down to. So when you're looking at life, business, or just observing people around you, I'm always looking for, where are your protect parts? Who's managing this?
Interesting.
What are you hiding? Because actually, when you're stepping into a more authentic self, which you will have done through therapy, and we are at times anyway, naturally and organically, if we feel safe, that's when people love you the most. And that's when people, it's when you're really being very magnetic. It's all energy, really, which sounds like, another area, but really we're all emitting a certain amount of energy and frequency all the time.
Because it's really interesting, Matt, what you were saying there, it struck a chord with me because the amount of agents that I speak to who they say to me, I feel like I'm and don't get me wrong, the categorization, these job titles would be wrong. They say, I feel like a therapist, I feel like a counsellor, I feel like I'm this, that and the other, to the couples that they're dealing with in their housing transaction, obviously something that's very emotionally charged, very stressful period of time, lot of money on the line, everything is it's very stressful. They feel like that. So it'd be really interesting today to sort of see what we can do to help them, and they're at that period when they're absorbing some of that stress. Just a quick question though, again, a stupid question, you'll get used to this, where how you say if you're not in touch with your core self, like how do you know if you are or you aren't? How do you know? I
think there's an intuition that most of us ignore. So if you feel, let's say you're walking into a meeting and it's a big presentation or something like that and there's a fear there, that's part of the vulnerable self. But beyond that, if you go all the way back to maybe 2 or 3, where you won't remember that, most people won't, where you were just freely doing whatever you wanted to do and exploring and being curious and just being present, that's core self. But that is often taken away from us because our parents or our teachers or people around us are telling us that we're wrong or that we shouldn't do this or that we shouldn't do that. So we learn who we are through the people around us. So those layers build up and then you forget who you are at core. But it's really when you're most present. There's probably times where you've been with friends and you've just forgotten the world around you and you feel really in the moment. That's core self. You're not pretending, you're not thinking, you're just being.
Time goes quickly, that's what's
this will date this episode, but there's a young lad I say young, he's 31, who died last week, Liam Payne, in a large boy band, and or used to be. And it was really sad. I found the whole situation really sad.
It's very sad.
Not because someone's lost their life at a tender age, but more the kind of vitriol and the abuse that people are open to suffering.
Yes.
From people they don't even know today.
Yeah.
And how that can still affect one's self-worth, self-confidence and validation. And I fear as a parent, and I fear as just from my own personal experience, of how the modern world is not gearing you up to be authentic.
No.
It's actually taking you further away from authenticity.
Yeah.
Because of the need to run your business.
Yeah.
To communicate. It's all about external validation.
It is.
How do you see this going? I mean, I grew up in the 80s, really. I'm 49 soon, again,
What do you mean again?
Again, we were talking about this earlier, yeah.
Are you doing this thing where you have the 49th
I would love to
birthday?
go backwards to 48, 47, 46. But no, but everything I don't know, looking back, and I don't know, I had a bit of a reflection last night. Looking back, everything felt quite slow and simplified. It felt cherished. It felt like you were more present. And,
Yeah.
and not even talking about when I was 2 or 3, because I can't remember when I was 23
I know what you
so
mean. I know
much.
what you
But,
mean, yeah.
but it just felt like that's a world that I think we're all missing at the minute.
Yeah, definitely.
And I worry that there's a lot of people that are in our industry in particular, and certainly as a parent, as I've mentioned, that are not really tapping into who they really are. So I think your question was really good about how do you find your core self? And a lot of people talk about values.
Yeah.
Is that the level up from what you do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so talking about core values, that is part of who you are, but it's not necessarily core self.
No.
It's what you've learned as a
That's it.
value. So the way I would describe this is core self is sort of this, I'm going to sound like a spiritual guru here, but is the higher self.
Yeah.
So this is the part that doesn't need the label of core values or director or psychotherapist or whatever. We're just being. And like I say, you'll know when you're in that state because you're forgetting about everything else. And it's just that connection that you feel with the people that you're with. You're probably all sharing that energy in that moment. When we look at everything else, and this gets a bit deep, so forgive me,
Come
but
on,
it's
let's
all
do
a
it.
construct. So your belief system is purely what you've learned from the people around you. And that construct was learned from the people around them. So we could look at things like geography, religion, cultures, everything. So there's universal principles that say your world, your reality is based on your thoughts and your perception. That's all it is. So 2 people can be right and 2 people can be wrong. And it's because everyone's coming from a slightly different angle. So when we talk about core values, I guess we're talking about moral compass.
Yeah.
And the moral compass is usually informed by religion. So, but religion in itself isn't bad. I think labels don't always help in terms of politics and war and so on, but the ideas of who we are and how we should behave so that society moves in the right direction. I think the core values and moral compass is important, but where are we getting them from? If you go back thousands of years, ancient Egyptians, even before that primitive man, you know, there were rules there that were unspoken and it would be more about survival. Now we're looking at how do we become the best versions of ourselves? And we're skipping, well, you were born the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you were always the best version of yourself. It's what you've learned along the way that's taken that away. So I think essentially when you go back to that moment of, we look at newborn babies and go, oh gosh, they're so precious and innocent and lovely. It's because their brain hasn't been structured yet. They've just got those epigenetics. So epigenetics are the genetic expressions that we continue to carry from our ancestors. And the data shows about 14, no, actually that's new data, 7 generations at the moment worth of ancestral lineage in our genetic expression. But new data says 14 generations worth. So we're born with that, and we're born with the basic physiological structures. Everything else is learned. So everything else is a construct. And that's where I say about redesigning. And a little bit of my story was, how do I redesign my life? Because I don't want to be like this anymore. How do I change the values? How do I change my perception? How do I tap into intuition? Because most people don't know how to do that either. How do I become a different version of myself? Not a better version of myself, but the version that I think I deserve to be. And that is about self-esteem.
That's super powerful, like as a statement in itself.
Yeah.
And for anyone listening, if you was to ask yourself that question, how do you get there? What sort of tips can you give people to look at that as part of a growth process? Because I think we mentioned earlier that fear, imposter syndrome, anxiety, they show up regularly in our industry, don't they? It can come to the most simplest part of the transaction where you're valuing someone's house and they're asking you to negotiate on your fees. It can show up when you're trying to renegotiate a sale. At any point, anxiety, fear, imposter syndrome can show up. How does someone recreate or redesign, in your words?
You have to understand what it is that you're lacking.
Yeah.
So the imposter syndrome is a fear of judgment and rejection ultimately. So you go back to, I guess, through a timeline and you say to people, okay, when was the first time you felt that wound where someone hadn't valued you and it was really important to you and you felt really hurt by that? Because that needs to be resolved.
And am I right in thinking that sorry to butt in there, but when you say felt mentally or physically, so in your body as opposed, right, okay.
You will have felt it both.
Yeah.
Whether you hold on to that information or whether you try to bypass that information because it's so painful.
Yeah.
Most people get that sinking feeling in their stomach
Yeah.
when something isn't going right. It could be a deal that fails. It could be a relationship.
Yeah.
You just know there's like a void or a heaviness.
Yeah.
And that area of the body is just where the stomach produces acid. So when we go into the fight-flight response and the body starts to produce adrenaline and cortisol, we tend to feel quite a lot of behaviour here. I say behaviour, think of it as like little people inside you preparing for battle, right?
Yeah.
So I always say you'll feel it in your tummy, and it's associated with self-worth and identity. So often people walk into a room, and if they haven't been able to reach self-validation because the fear is, I'm not good enough, I'll be rejected, what I'm offering isn't enough for these people in this room, you'll have that feeling in your stomach. And then normally, if you want to fight it, it will go up into your chest and you'll feel the compression on your chest and you're ready to fight. If you are super anxious and about to have a panic attack, it'll often go down into your legs and you'll want to run. So your body will tell you what you need to do. And it's usually based on what you had to do to survive when you were younger. So whatever you had to do to survive, whatever parts worked for you, if running away and avoiding worked for you and kept you safe, that's generally what your body will continue to do. But if fighting it out was the only way you could survive, it tends to follow that pattern. It gets stuck in those loops.
Wow, that's really interesting.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Nuts,
and this is the thing. I mean, we're literally only 15, 20 minutes into a conversation. But, you know, if you're someone out there at the moment, and like I said, I think there won't be many people that haven't got some stuff to take on, because if you want the end result, you want to earn X amount, you want to build a business, team, whatever it is, it's how much of this stuff keeps you stuck in your growth.
It's an interesting one if you aren't aware of it. So some people just aren't. They just have the feelings and they are too embarrassed or too uncomfortable with themselves to even begin to talk about it to anybody. So they produce this character. And what you'll see in the meeting is the character, and it might not always be the nicest person, but again, that part works for them.
Because they've done the repetition.
Yeah, they've copied someone,
Right.
which is kind of what I did to start with.
Well, I think we probably all have at some
Yeah,
point in
yeah.
our
Yeah,
lives. You know?
yeah. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with looking up to successful leaders and saying, I don't know how to be that yet, so I'm going to kind of do what they do. It's the fake it till you make it thing. But if you stay in fake it till you make it and you're not actually looking deep within, and like you say, you went to therapy and kind of started that process and found different ways to frame how you thought about yourself. If you don't do that bit, you can feel very detached and disassociated from yourself. And that's where you see depression and I'm going to be careful how I use this word because I hate the social media movement around narcissism. It's really damaging actually, because people are calling everybody's a narcissist.
Yeah.
It's not, and we've all got narcissistic traits, all of us in this room, we all have. But you can become quite narcissistic when you're disassociated and disconnected from self, because obviously you're not being in an authentic, true space. So you're much more in cultivating rather than being, if that makes any sense.
And does that detach you? Is it almost self-preservation there? So you're
Definitely.
almost like protecting yourself away from the emotional situation.
Yeah.
Because you've created that place where you know that won't affect you.
Yeah, and actually then when you're in that space, and I think we've all been there at times, you haven't got the space or the desire to tap into anybody else's emotions, because that might trigger something in you. So the best way is to stay, it's maladaptive by the way, but in that maladaptive thought process, the best way is to stay disconnected. And that's when you see addictions and so on, because that's when people are struggling.
And then they feel like when they do whatever it is, their coping mechanism, it kind of creates a bit more of their authenticity.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. Fascinating, because in this industry, we hear a lot. We have quite a few guests now talk about the authenticity when it comes to personal brand or marketing and all of those different elements. And you almost wonder how people really get to that place because of the drive away from it that society is creating.
Yeah.
From what we were talking about earlier in this talk. How do people really kind of like continue this journey to self-discovery? I know we've put some couple of suggestions in place there, but a lot of people see therapy and they think, oh well, that means you're weak or you're, I don't know, you're nuts.
Yeah, there's something wrong with you.
You know, they probably think I'm nuts anyway, but if I'm honest, but I probably am. But it's seen as a weakness. My perception of it over a number of years has been your brain is that's a really important part of everything that you do.
Well, without it, nothing else works properly.
So if you can't train it, teach it, redesign it in your words, you're going to really limit your growth and progression.
You'll limit your experience.
Right.
You can't connect if your brain's in protector mode and manager mode. You can't connect to people authentic. The word authenticity is bandied around as a fashionable word in the same way that, think of the polarity.
Yes.
Same frequency, narcissism, authenticity.
Yeah.
And people are using those words without fully actually being authentic. Yeah. So when you're being truly authentic, I saw something really interesting yesterday. It was a group of ladies that used to do my social media for me. They don't now, and it's nothing to do with them. It was just to do with finances at the time. And it was a great post, and I felt this was authentic. So she was listing off all the things that they could do. So let's say we can provide you with the content, but if you were to ask us who we would refer, if you didn't want to use us, we would recommend so-and-so and so-and-so. We could do your sales copy for you. But if you didn't want to use us, we would recommend. And I thought that was authentic because it's saying we're good at what we do, but you might not like us. So here are other people that you can use. That shows someone who's being truly authentic and vulnerable because she's tagged all the people. So I could go, I did like them, but I didn't actually like you. I'll try that instead. She's almost putting herself in the position to be rejected. But the reason that that's a good thing is because she's obviously done all the work on herself.
For sure, that's fine.
Yeah, you could pick, and there's no competition when you're in that space.
Just picking you up on that, because that's a really great example for the listeners. I was in an appointment not long ago and I said, look, I don't think I'm the right fit for you, but there is an agent that will charge this and you should go to them.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to lie, being truly authentic, it was a bit of a strategy.
Yeah.
Right? But I am quite cool with rejection. I've been rejected enough over the years to know that actually it's just part and parcel of what we do. And actually there's an element where you go, well, how can I improve off the back of rejection?
It's a chance to learn.
Yeah. So, but I love that example. But that stretched the word of authenticity and narcissism bandied around and a hell of a lot out there in the field. And you're right. I think there's a lot of people that perhaps are trying to be.
They want you to think they are because they want to think they are. But when you're truly authentic, if you asked me about me as a psychotherapist and said, are you the best psychotherapist? I would probably say no, because I'm not the most academic. I know a lot about what I know about, but there are areas that I would lack in. I think I've got my fan club. I said to you, I've got people that have been coming to me for 17 years. And you might say, well, if they've been coming for you for 17 years, you're obviously not very good at what you're doing. But I think it's providing a safe space. It's the education. Because obviously over that 17 years, you're going to go through loads of life experiences and you want someone you're safe with that can educate you through that process. So am I the best? Probably not. Am I great at building relationships? I think that's where the key is. I think people feel safe. And I think people know I've got a lot of knowledge for what they're looking for. But, you know, if you wanted a totally different approach, I'm not going to be able to offer that. This is what I do. This is my lane and I'm staying in it. And I think I'm also quite open about the mistakes I've made and about the serious mental health issues that I've had. And I talk about, you know, the sexual abuse thing really openly because I've got no shame attached to it. And I'm not trying to use that as leverage either for getting people through the door. It's just that if you have had some kind of trauma that is seen as, I don't know, shameful or embarrassing, then by me just saying, look, there's so many people that have been sexually abused, so many, maybe not by their dads, but the statistics for it are far higher. I mean, you only have to look at the Epstein thing and the P. Diddy thing and the music industry, the film industry. So many people are sexually abused. Why are we not talking about it more? Why aren't we holding people accountable? Why are we hiding it?
Yeah, and not just females as well.
Yeah,
like,
men.
There's a balance now.
I think you kind of you leading by example there, because I went on your Instagram and your first post, which is pinned at the top, is your full story, just you and the camera straight down the lens, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just to come back to something that the topic you talked about earlier, which I think is quite relevant to our audience to a degree when you're talking about that imposter syndrome, and I think it's relevant to this subject of just bringing it all the way back to premium property. Is what happens, I think, for most people as they come into the industry and then just, I'm generalising here, but work up the ranks of property price. No one starts on day one selling £1 million homes. That's for the more experienced agents. I think it'd be fair to say, Matt.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So at some point they're going to go into a house that's the most expensive house they've ever got into. And we talk quite a lot and hear quite a lot of stories about people having that imposter syndrome as they do that, and for whatever reason feeling that that's out of their depth, out of their comfort zone and so on. And when you were talking about imposter syndrome there, you were talking about almost handling it. I'd heard something which I quite liked, which was almost the other way, which was to go towards imposter syndrome, because if you're in a situation where you feel that, you know, you're doing something which is sort of on the edge of what you've done before. So you're kind of pushing the envelope a bit, and you're growing, and you're doing something which is frightening, but for the right reasons. It's not like a roller coaster, which I find very frightening, but for no reason, but it's doing something which is outside of your comfort zone, and therefore it's growth. So I'd just be interested to know about how you think that agents listen to this. Let's just take the example because it's nice to have an example, going into a premium property like that and feeling like an imposter, how they can mitigate those feelings, be more confident and end up with a better result for themselves.
I think you're right. I think, you know, fake it till you make it is fine. Like I say, pushing those boundaries is fine. If there are things coming up for you and you've done it, let's say 5 times, and you're still thinking, this is just so anxiety provoking for me, then clearly the comfort zone thing needs some extra work.
Yeah, okay.
So I would say that's when you start to address the issues underneath. But I think you're right,
really
walking into it is really important, because you learn so much about yourself and also your industry in that space. Whatever that industry is, if you don't go to those spaces, you don't know what you're capable of. And also, if we go back to core self, why aren't you good enough to step into that £1 million house? You may not have all the skills and knowledge and experience, but that doesn't mean you're not good enough to be there. If you feel like you're not good enough to be there, that leans into self-esteem issues. If you feel like, okay, I don't quite know everything yet, but I'm willing to learn, and you're going to walk into that, you know, feel the fear and do it anyway. That whole book was written around this subject. Walk into it, face those fears and address them. What comes up for me physically and emotionally? And if I'm still feeling that after 5 or 6 times, what is it about me that is scared? Who's scared? What part of me is scared, and why? But you would never learn that if you weren't going to do those things in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's what most people do. And I've found this actually with a lot of people who haven't had a lot of adversity, is that it's been so comfortable for them that adversity is actually really, really difficult. For me, it was easy, like, what have I got to lose?
Yeah.
I mean,
what's harder than that?
Yeah. So I'll just keep going. And maybe that is almost a bit of a cheat code, I think. I'm not suggesting it, but as advice, but if you've had a lot of adversity early on, you are built a bit more resilient by the time you're starting out. If life's been, and this is what I would say to anyone with their kids, don't make it too easy and don't make it too perfect. Because when they then are that estate agent and they're going into that £1 million house for the first time, they may well feel like, I don't have the tools to deal with this. They can't fake it till they make it. They've never had to do that before. Everything's been handed to them. It's been easy.
Yeah.
They don't have that as a
resilience
default.
build up.
Yeah. So I think if you go into those situations and you're really struggling after the first few times, that's when you'd need to think, where does this begin? Why do I feel not good enough?
That's super interesting.
I'm going a bit deep on this, if you don't mind.
Let's roll the sleeves up.
Well, you know, I lost my brother. He was 21. He died very suddenly. And
Sorry to hear that. It's terrible.
you know, these at the time I didn't particularly handle it very well. But how do you when you're 19? But I can honestly say that I probably wouldn't be where I am now if it hadn't happened.
Yeah.
But there was 10 years of my life where I held on to particular emotions that meant I was very much in a kind of like a victim-y kind of mindset. And again, that gets banded around a lot, doesn't it? But you know, the best way to describe it was, why me? Why us? That kind of thing. And then when you start to figure stuff out and you learn a bit more about, you can't control those situations. And one of the questions I asked was obviously if he was here now, what would he be telling me? You know, and then you move out of that place. But obviously you've suffered at a very young age. I'm not saying you'd ever thank the situation.
I kind of do though.
So that's where that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Someone said to me about, you know, losing. I couldn't talk about it for 10 years.
No.
And now I can talk about it on a podcast. Do you know what I mean? I can talk about it anywhere. I've got
it's good for people listening that are stuck right now.
Well, and I probably haven't. That doesn't even cross my mind now.
No.
Because that resilience that's been inbuilt in me and in you and in other people that have suffered is you have two paths to choose from, and one path is harder, but it's more rewarding, and it's certainly going to take you to another place where you can use such pain and tragedy as a strength, and that will help inspire other people. So you'll actually, if you look at what branches out of that, it's very positive. So you can turn that situation into a real positive situation.
It's the energy cycle, the rhythm.
Yeah. Or you go down with it and you cost another life, because almost on my life I would have costed my life as well as my brother's.
What changed that enabled you to talk about it?
Believe it or not, I went to a spiritualist.
Yeah?
That helped.
Again,
I was so
idiot in the room.
sceptical.
I don't know what's a spiritualist?
Okay. Somebody does tarot card readings, started opening up, and what came out of it
Really?
was situations and conversations that only me and my brother had. So I'm very much so.
Wow.
So I'm going off on a tangent on this.
No, but
super
can
interesting,
I
though.
pull up on that? Because
Yeah.
I've spoken about energy a couple of times. If you are open, you can really tap into other people's energy.
Yeah.
You really, really can. Like, I don't think I'm psychic, but I can know, if I use this example on probably every podcast I've ever been on, but you can walk into a room where there's been an argument 10 minutes before and feel the atmosphere.
That's true, yeah.
And you can walk into a room where there's been a lot of fun 10 minutes before. Those people have left and you can feel, oh, this feels, you can feel the atmosphere, you can feel the energy. Energy is electromagnetic waves. They can't be seen or touched, but they are how we know. And animals use energy as a way of communicating. They can tell from just looking. And don't forget, communication is 90% non-verbal. So it's body language, IQs, all of this.
Just a really quick one. When you said open, you said if you're, the start of that sentence, you said if you're open. What does that mean if you're open?
It means that you're not limiting. I mean, you going to a spiritualist meant that you were finally open to answers.
Yeah.
Some people would go somewhere else, but you were starting to be ready to open up.
Yeah.
Instead of be closed off because you were closed for 10 years.
I mean, the lady had this smelly sort of stuff going on, and I could probably tell you what the smell was now. I walked in there, and in a bag I carried his Nottingham Forest shirt and a hairbrush because he had long hair. Now she didn't see what was in the bag, sat down, very quickly established his name was Andrew, and he said...
you say established, you mean that you didn't tell her?
Yeah, no. Because bearing in mind that I've gone into this, like, it's not my idea, but my wife suggested it might be a good idea because she had done a similar thing.
But you were open enough.
But I was open enough to do it. Yeah. So I got in there and I was I think I was open and hoping deep down. And so he came through. My last conversation with Andrew was, I called him some really bad names because we both had to do some work on a building site the week before. Now he was at university in Portsmouth, so I'd done my week, and bearing in mind I'd been a footballer, and next thing you know, I'm a fucking building site, carrying muck up and down, doing the things, freezing cold, January. He's come up and done his week. I'm thinking I'm the bee's knees. He's crying off with a cold. And I'm like, he's rung the home number, because obviously didn't have a mobile. He wants mum. I said, why are you bumming off the work? You fucking lazy arsehole, basically. And that was the last conversation I had with him. And it's really strange to kind of think back to that. And then going into the conversation that's caused us to have a bit of a grudge, he took my best jacket down to Portsmouth.
You said this before.
And I was like, you took my jackets. That's what triggered off that kind of reaction to him phoning up. And anyway, the lady in the spiritualist meeting, she said to me, she goes, he's laughing at you, which he often did. And he said he's talking about a jacket. So.
And how do you feel about, sorry, this is a bit off topic. How do you feel about spiritualists in general now? Like, look,
I think there's good and bad in every walk of life.
There is, yeah.
I think the openness bit, I think you've really hit how much do we not know about because we're closed-minded, right?
So much.
So my world's been enlightened by openness, and I think I'm just going to continue to explore it.
That's cool.
So I'm very much on the wavelength of it's not for everyone, especially if you're closed. But that's the same as personal development.
Of course it is.
It's the same as therapy.
Yeah.
It's the same as going into a training room and hearing somebody try and teach you a new way of doing something. You know, if you are closed, your world will remain at that size.
And why are you closed in the first place?
Well,
it's protection.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've learnt to be that way. It's been a safer experience to be closed, but it's limited, and actually you don't get to have the full human experience. Now, on that note with the energy thing, I don't get the bit where they've got the details. Like that bit it baffles me.
It baffled me.
And I don't understand it, and I can't claim to be able to explain it. Somebody else would be able to do that far better than I. But what I do know is I've heard those stories too many times now over the 20-year period that I've been doing psychotherapy for me to go, it's a load of rubbish. I would be stupid to do that because there's so many people that have had those stories. Now, some of them might be hearing what they want to hear.
For sure.
And if that brings you comfort, but also opens you up to a new way of being, thinking and experiencing life, then go for it, whatever works.
And I think there's an element where, you know, you can certainly be guided in conversations. So I'm certainly more aware of that now. But the reason we got onto that subject was about how that's trauma has helped me.
Yeah.
And if someone's listening and they've recently lost someone or they're going through some very difficult times, I think when you're in those moments, there's no way out.
No.
There's a black ceiling above you. And even if you haven't and you're feeling in that place, there is hope. And actually, I think that's the thing to kind of shed a light on that.
It's so true. The word, because I was going to bring you up on the word hope. The word hope applies to everything. Career, relationships, illness. There are very few cases, although I do know of some, where someone has had so much complex trauma throughout their lives. It might have been abused in childhood, then they've had a terrible accident, and then, you know, they've not been able to work for a few years, and then they've tried to get into the world of investments or whatever, and they've lost a lot of money, and then they've lost their wives, and then, you know, their child has died, and you just think, oh my God, and their brain literally starts to just create this space which is all about safety and nothing else. Yeah. And then neurobiologically, everything starts to change. And it's really, really hard in those circumstances. But if you have hope and you have people around you, and this is the other thing, it's the community, people around you who support you no matter how dark and angry and aggressive and broken you might feel and be at times. 100%. If you've just got that one person that's willing to go, do you know what, I'm going to be here no matter what, I'm never going to abandon you, we're going to do this together, then you might have that little smidgen of hope. So I would say to people that feel like there's no hope, who's around you that can support you, because they might be the person that you can lean on until you're able to find hope again. And it comes away from the whole property thing, really. But I think there'll be people that are turning up, and everybody, even with you, Matt, you know, and both of you actually, they might look at you and think, you two've got it made. Yeah, for sure. Like you're, you know, the top of the tree, you know what's going on. And actually, there might be days you wake up, and I don't know this, I'm assuming, because I have these days, so I just think, what am I doing? You know, is it really worth it? You know, all this stress? Can I breathe properly? Do I feel a bit... do I really want to spend another 20 years like this? You know, and I'll start to almost talk myself into being miserable. Yeah. And then I'll give myself 24 hours, maybe 48, and think, okay, do you still feel like that? Because if you do, these are the things you've got to do. Move your body a bit more, you know, get a little bit more sleep, all those basics things. And if it's still not working, then you have to assess your life and go, something needs to change. You don't need to be stuck in this is hopeless. With men, interesting, it's often finances. Yeah. So that brings us back to
pressures.
Yeah,
as a men feel stress related
responsibility. I think.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the sort of big causes of suicide in men. One of the main ones. If you talk to anyone who has, I'm not saying it's always, it could be addiction and it could be other things, and you know sometimes it's chemical and neurobiological, but a lot of men take their own lives over finances, status, how they're perceived by others as a result of losing money. And I'd imagine in the investment world, property investment world, there's a lot of that going on as well, where people build their character around the amount of money that they have. And if they were to lose that on a bad investment, who are they now?
That's really interesting. And kind of, again, branching off of that subject, there's a great quote, which is comparison is the thief of joy. And social media is a part to play in the fact that even if you've got a £300 million portfolio, you want a £500 million portfolio because somebody that you're following's got that or whatever.
Yeah.
I think mentoring or having people to look up is a good thing, as we've already alluded to, but not losing sight of who you are and what you've got.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I did a podcast with a guy called James, who, it was the one before this one, and he speaks about a moment where he lost £750,000. He says he gave it away.
That one. Yeah, I listened to that one.
And I was like, 750,000. Anyway, the next day, I won't say who it is, but a guy who's very well known, and I won't say too much. He messaged me and he said, I think you'd faint. That was what he said. I think you'd faint if you realised I'd lost 750 million. And I just thought, there you go. It's all that spectrum, isn't it? Is where someone's gone, oh my gosh, it's the worst thing that'll ever happen. There's someone else that's lost, 750 million as opposed to 750,000. And it's the same in anything. You can compare up or you can compare down.
And it's how you tackle those situations, isn't it? Yeah. Which is often born from the work that you've done on yourself.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So, how you think calmly under situations, whether you react, whether you respond.
Yes.
And what makes you deal with things in a certain way, whether you bury your head, whether you kind of go, right, let's walk into the challenge. It's very enlightening that what I think I'm sort of saying to people is you have a choice.
You do.
It's not an easy one.
No.
And most of the time, the more difficult the choice, the better the result.
Yeah.
If you're taking easy choices, it's normally going to mean.
Yeah. I heard a quote that sums up, it was something like, easy choice is hard life, hard choice is easy life.
Yeah, so true. And that goes back to what you were saying about the £1 million house. That's the hard choice.
Yeah.
You could stay at a level where you're comfortable,
but
you will never feel as accomplished. And I always say, when you're on the escalator and it's like one of the really, really long ones, you can stand there and take the journey just standing in a row, or you can walk up to the top. When you walk up to the top, you're like, but you feel more accomplished just because you've taken the harder route. You're like, I've still got it. I'm still fit.
Yeah.
And actually, it's the same with any choice in life. You're going to feel more accomplished if you take the harder choices. You're going to have to face yourself. You have to look at yourself in the mirror, and it's only by facing the harder choices that you get to do that. Accountability always. Where am I suffering? Why am I comfortable in my suffering? And going back to what you went through, there's a little part of me that thinks when we die, not necessarily reincarnation, but reincarnation, we become part of the ecosystem. Our bodies are either cremated or put into the earth, and insects and animals and trees absorb us, or the ocean takes us and something will eat us, and we become part of that larger ecosystem. And also energy cannot be destroyed. So the energy of somebody or something, even a house, this is where people talk about, is this house haunted, Energy can't be destroyed. It just gets redistributed. So when we were talking about psychics earlier, and we were saying about, being open, once you start to see the bigger picture, it's not just a beginning and an end. This life, in my opinion, is a tiny grain of sand in the whole scale of the universe.
Yeah.
So when you're feeling the fear of, an investment or as the estate agent, not feeling like you're good enough, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It really is quite irrelevant. Your experience is what counts, because that generates the energy that continues to redistribute long after you're gone. It's all about, and I don't mean legacy as in, again, the label. I mean, who are you? What are you about? And what do you want to leave behind in terms of memories? Not just finances, not just thank God he had a Rolex on when he was put in the coffin. Who cares? It's all about who you are as a person and the energy you emit.
I mentioned earlier about how a lot of estate agents, that I speak to, feel like they can sometimes be the fulcrum between two different parties, and they're absorbing all of that. How can they insulate themselves from just dealing with that amount of emotion and stress and absorbing it all day long, and they come out of it and they feel exhausted through not their own problems, just other people's problems? I guess you must be an absolute pro at this. This is what you do professionally all day long. What tips could you give them to, I don't know whether insulate's the right word for it, but somehow protect themselves and their mindset from just taking all of that on too much when they have to listen and help their clients through it as well?
Very good question. There's no easy answer to this, but one thing I'd say, if you're somebody that feels like that, ask yourself, what things are coming up? So who are the people that are making you feel that you're having to carry that weight for them? What are the topics of conversation? What are their personality types? Because it feels, for me, when people are carrying the emotions or the energy of other people, that it's actually triggering something in you.
Okay.
So you might have a day where you're with certain people, they've got problems, whatever, and you come away like, okay, that's their problem, not mine.
Yeah.
But if you come away feeling like, oh God, that's heavy, it's because there's something in you
That's interesting.
that's a magnet for that problem. It's triggering something unresolved. So the first question is what, and I would journal for anyone. I mean, some of the CEOs and leaders and managing directors that I work with, I say, just get your notes out on your phone and just make bullet points. So if you feel that this was a particularly heavy experience, note down who it was, how old they were, what they were saying, why it got, that's the only way you'll figure it out. And then when you realise that that's actually still their problem, but it's triggering something in me, I'm not carrying their problem, I'm carrying my own. We think we're carrying other people's problems, we're not. We're carrying our own.
Wow.
The only time that's ever happened to me was a very extreme case of sexual abuse, and it was a person that had been involved in being abused by a paedophile ring. And I won't repeat anything that was said because it was too dark even for me after 20 years of doing this job. It's the worst case I've ever heard of sexual abuse in my entire life, and that's including things that you'll see as serial killer documentaries. Horrendous. And I never cry after sessions. I never feel that overwhelming despair. And I felt that, and I was trying to work out what was being triggered for me, and it was the fear that I wouldn't be able to help her. And that was, and I have been able to help her, and I can't resolve everything, obviously, but I can support her and I can be there for her. But it was that fear of, this is too much for me. A bit like walking, it's what you were saying about imposter syndrome, walking into that thing and going, I haven't got the tools for this, I don't know how to do this bit. And I think that was the bit that came up for me. So I realised then that a lot of my identity is centred around being able to help people. I don't like the word help, actually. I prefer the word educate and support. But that came up like, I don't know what to do with this. And then what does that mean about me? It wasn't conscious, but it must have had an effect on me. Yes, some of it was traumatic to hear, but I'm quite good at hearing traumatic things. It was more that, who am I if I can't do this? And I think if you look at what's going on for you, you can release that kind of heavy weight that is theirs to carry. We each have to carry our own, and then we can meet in the middle and support each other.
Wow. That's a great answer, isn't
Great
it?
answer, yeah.
And just another relatable thing, I think, just picking up just through the conversation, the one thing that you've probably had to do and you've done really well, and you should follow Ella on Instagram. You've got a very good following on there. You're regularly on that particular platform.
Yeah.
Is estate agents probably have a fear of putting themselves out there, which comes back to certain things that we've already probably discussed. Did you?
Oh gosh, yeah, I still do.
Okay.
I still compare myself. You spoke about Liam, who I'd had on my podcast, who's got an amazing podcast, like a huge following. Liam does these silly dances on his page, and he must get like 400 million views. You know, it's just ridiculous. Whatever Liam does, he's just a magnet. People love him. And then, again, you can compare up or compare down. So then if I put something out and I feel like, didn't get any shares, because a lot of mine don't get shares. And I think a lot of the reason they don't get shares is because people don't want to be seen to be sharing that content, because then people know that there's something going on for them. So it feels like I'm in a space where it's hard for me to grow because people don't want to share this particular bit or this particular moment. And that might not be the case. It might just be that it's not engaging enough. Who knows? But the point being is that I still have that, is this good enough? Is this just, you know, when something doesn't grow the same way that somebody else's does, even I'm thinking, well, why? What am I doing wrong? We all go back to that. And we come away from the authentic core self, and we go into, how do I make this better?
It's
so
interesting.
It is
so
interesting.
when did you really start to invest in that kind of part of your journey? Because obviously you qualified in what you did, and I can't remember many hypnotherapists. Sorry, yeah.
Well, both, yeah.
Yeah, psychotherapists, if you like, going out there and putting themselves out there on the likes of social media. When did you start that journey?
It was a dangerous move, because when you do that, I said something to you earlier about, having lots of people that come to see me, and sometimes they don't want to move on to someone else. There's no beginning and end to the way I do therapy. If there's life experiences that happen to you, you might stop seeing me and then come back 2 years later. We know each other, it's safe for you to do that. And if you see a lot of people as I do, you start to feel like, I can't keep doing just that. I need to reach the wider audience, because people would say, very kindly, I get so much out of our sessions, you should do a podcast, or, you should put yourself out there. I thought, okay, well, I'll start to do that. And then what happens is you do that, and there's a lot of free content out of there, and then you realise people like it, and they're, sharing it, or they're saving it, or whatever. And then you have another huge responsibility with social media. So the original bit was reaching a wider audience and using a natural skill to be able to do that. I don't monetize off it at the moment. I'll be honest. Like, I've put a lot of work, it's a lot of hours, it's a job, social media.
Yeah.
And I will monetize off it, because that enables me then to continue reaching more people, and putting programs out there. That there's a lot of got to be careful what I say, because I don't want to sound judgmental, but there's a lot of crap programs out there that don't really look at the depths of neurobiology. They don't really look at the depths of trauma. There's a lot of kind of standard, I said this to you earlier, there's a lot of standard wellbeing mental health information out there that doesn't really go in. It doesn't go into the core of a person.
Do you think that's because people are just trying to sell stuff?
Yeah.
Because you've gone the opposite way around. You're giving stuff and then selling it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
What I've tried to do is be of value first. And I've done that for the last few years now. But it's to the point now where I'm losing my value, as in I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm doing too much. So there has to be a change for me, because otherwise I can't show up for my clients if I'm stressed and tired. I do, and I push through that most of the time, but that can only continue for a certain amount of time.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
You can't. And being my age, women's hormones are very different to men's. So if you've got women listening, maybe mainly men, I don't know, but we do a lot of our hormones through our adrenal glands. Men, if you want me to be honest, do a lot of your hormones through your testicles. And in order to have a healthy adrenal system, women need a lot more sleep than men. We need 8 to 10 hours. Men only need between 5 and 6.
Okay,
so I'm not getting that sleep right now. And I'm perimenopausal, heading into that next phase of my life. And I can feel the changes in my body and physiological system as a result of that. So you asked me the question about social media, but when you grow something, and this is for anyone that's thinking about it, be careful, because you've got to, and I didn't do this because I didn't think it was going to grow, you've got to have the next, and this is for any business, doesn't have to be on social media, you've got to have the next steps in mind. But you said something right at the beginning, which is the process, because we all go to the end goal first, don't we? Well, I want to make 1 million, or I want to make 3 million, I want to make 4 million. But the process in the meantime, you might kill yourself getting there. So you need to be really aware of that. I wasn't when I started social media. And it's something that I'm having to learn how to authentically monetize from it without feeling like I'm doing something wrong, because that's the moral compass thing that I fight with.
And how do you do that?
I think it's about providing value and having different stages. So I've got a whole brand launching, which is with 2 other directors, and that's a more high-end brand. But at the same time, I'm launching an app, which is, I've got a huge waiting list, and that's only £10 a month for that app. So obviously, you're going to get a lot of value from the app. It will be mainly trauma-focused, but it's for the people that can't afford therapy.
Yeah.
So it's having those different layers of what you offer.
It's accessible.
Yeah.
And you feel like your needs are met as well.
Yeah, yeah. And with that app, yes, you'll get all the information, but you'll also get once a month, if I can keep that up, that's not a promise, but once a month there'll be a live masterclass. If not, then I'll make shorter videos once a month, but there will be that face-to-face. It will feel like a face-to-face kind of group therapy with me.
I mean, that's brilliant for anyone listening as well, about putting yourself out there, because it's not an overnight thing, is it?
No, no, it's not. And you know, doing this,
I mean,
this is
It's
hard
amazing.
work.
What amazed me, I'll then say this to you. So Matt and I went to a industry conference put on by Mark Burgess, who we're in business together with. He does this great conference every year called Estate Agency X. There's probably, 200 people in the room? Something like that?
Yeah.
And at one point, there was one of the speakers was Daniel Priestley, who, you know Daniel, I'm like a super fanboy of his, and he asked the room who is building their personal brand. We're not spoke about this. I couldn't believe it. It was maybe 10% of the room put their hand up.
Sure.
And that you'd
Max.
think, if they are people that are in the industry going to this conference, self-development, learning, and 90% of them weren't doing that. I was thinking, Jesus Christ, I couldn't believe that.
That's true. And that's where the opportunity is, right?
Yeah.
But you've got to break through the fear. So what's holding you back?
Yeah.
This is what we've talked about today, guys. You know, you will be listening to this and thinking, so I just need to do it. Right, okay. I think you have to be passionate about your subject or the things around the property industry that you might be focusing on to build your personal brand. I think it's really important to stay passionate about what it is you do and why.
What does that feel like to you though? Because passion's a funny thing, isn't it? Again, it's perception.
Yeah, true.
So
That's another word.
What makes you passionate about property?
Property, I'm not really that passionate about.
Okay.
Straight away. People, yes.
Yeah.
Like my thing's people, because I think David probably knows this anyway, I'm not a particularly process orientated person. Stick me in a room with someone, fantastic.
You're
love
creative.
It. Absolutely creative. I love to have conversations. I love to learn from people. I was saying to someone yesterday that, you know, I'd love to have a podcast one day which is really outside of the property industry, which is meeting the kind of people I'm inspired by, who've got really valuable information and insights to share and add value to others. So for me, that's where I'm in my passionate place. It just so happens I work with team members, managers, directors, CEOs occasionally, but more so customers as well, clients. And I feel like I quite like to help people to get to where they want to go. And it just so happens to be an estate agency.
Why did you go into it in the first place?
My mum, I was bumming around, just got made redundant from another job. Came out of football, so I was a footballer until I was 19. And she just said, look, your uncle does estate agency, he thinks you'd be really good. I didn't have a suit, I had long hair. Back in the 90s, I had the curtains.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Look the biz, you know. Didn't have a suit, didn't have a driving license. And there was an advert she shared with me. She said, look, go and why don't you try it? And it said driving license required. Didn't have a driving license. So I was straight there, barriers up. I'm not going to get the job. He said, well, why don't you just go and ask for an application form? So I did. And walked into town 2 miles away, got an application form, and it kind of started there. But the guy asked the same question, why did you do it? And I said, I just love helping people. So for me, that was what got me into the industry, and that's what I've continued when I've focused on trying to help people with their outcomes. That's the bit I get the most amount from. I think I've kind of broadened my own passion in terms of going into subjects like today, not with any qualifications, but from a personal experience. And I think that's how I tend to move forward.
Someone I worked with, this is going back some time, and I think this was actually more to do with his relationship with his wife. But anyway, they had like therapy. I'm not sure whether psychotherapy and therapy is the same thing or not, but anyway, he said therapy. And he said, oh, it was amazing. I'd recommend anyone to have that. That was it. I was like, and he said, not even if there's a subject matter that they need anyway. So everyone should do that. Yeah. And I thought, wow, okay, I've never done it, but would you agree with that, or do you think that that's a waste if someone doesn't necessarily need it? Not
at all. I think there's a massive misconception that we should wait till there's a real big problem in our lives before we start to look at self. Probably the reason there's a real big problem in your life is because you've never looked at self, and that's not your fault. It's our education system, actually. That is getting better, by the way, but it's not delivered yet in a way where the child is seen as an individual. And because children aren't valued as individuals, so I've got a daughter who's just finished secondary school now at college, loving it because she's treated like an adult, like an individual. She's doing film and media, which again is quite creative, and it's no longer Sir and Miss, it's David and Mike and whoever else. And they, you know, she feels like she's being seen. And when you look at the secondary school system in particular, boys that might have difficulties concentrating or focusing or sitting still, that maybe want to play football and climb walls, they're shoved into isolation. And they're not given the opportunity to understand self. They're told, you're being disruptive, get out, sit on your own in there and, you know, sort yourself out. And it's kind of like, well, no wonder they don't want to then go and talk to somebody about life, who they are, what they want to be, because they've been shut down from day one. And they might come from households where they're one of four. There isn't the time to give them that attention. So I think one of the things that we must do is start exploration of self from really early on. And I think what we used to have, and I'm going to go back to religion even though I'm not religious, but what we used to have was in communities, you know, going back into the 70s and the 80s and really early 90s, I guess, you'd have your communities and you would feel like, I mean, we used to do the Bible stories, you know, the children's Bible stories in class. It doesn't really matter what the religion is, but having that as a foundation, because again, it's encouraging kindness and moral compass, but also it's got to be self-reflective in a way that the child can understand. Then when you become a young adult, you might have the desire, because you've had that community around you, and you might feel safe to be able to go and explore that further. Unfortunately, when we were growing up, and probably when you were growing up, it wasn't encouraged. Even though we had the beginnings of something good, community, so on, it was still very much a time where people were focusing on careers. You know, you might go into the military or the building trade or football or nursing or something, but you weren't really looking at the deeper issues that were coming up. So I think if you go to therapy, think of it as an exploration of self. It's like going to a country with a map. I don't know where I'm going to go, but I'm sure I'm going to find something that I'm going to enjoy.
Yeah, nice.
And it's about that for me.
Cool. Good answer.
Especially in relationships, by the way.
Yeah, well, that was what his example was.
Yeah, because relationships are tough. And any relationship, be it an intimate one or be it a relationship with a colleague, you need to understand all perspectives. So therapy can be about that as well.
Okay.
I was just kind of I'm finishing on a point there about, so it's like emotional intelligence is a bandied around subject again, but I think it's quite an important part of being in a people industry.
Yeah.
How much of your work is to help people with that particular area? As
in work and industry, or just emotional intelligence in general?
Emotional intelligence in general.
I think it is. I think it's about opening it. I think it's all around that, to be honest, because most people aren't emotionally in tune with themselves.
That's what I mean, yeah.
If you haven't got that, or you're too emotionally in tune, you could be hypersensitive or hyposensitive. So hyposensitive, disassociated, disconnected, and hypersensitive is when you feel everything and anything. You can't walk into a room without, you know, feeling everything all at once. So it's about finding that balance and understanding why.
Yeah.
And again, there's a whole theory, just very quickly, called polyvagal theory. It's associated with neurodiversity, so ADHD, autism, but primarily with trauma. And it talks about the vagus nerve, it talks about the brain-body link, it talks about what the vagus nerve is doing and why we can't socialise, why we can't connect to others, why we might be in this dorsal vagal state of shutdown. And so it's just learning the brain-body system first, which leads into emotional intelligence.
Wow. Did you catch that?
Yeah, just about.
Just to go through that slightly just at the end, just to make sure we capture that, because it's a really important.
Okay, so there's different parts of our body that are giving signals. So either, as we spoke about earlier, it's called dorsal vagal state, which is essentially disconnected, disassociated, plain dead. Animals do this when there's a predator chasing them and they fear they can't run or fight, so they play dead, they roll over and pretend to be dead. And then ventral vagal is the ability to connect and socialise and be present. If you are in dorsal vagal state, shut down, disconnected, you won't be able to do the socialising from a genuine point of view. You'll feel socially anxious, imposter syndrome, all of those things. If you are open, it's what we were saying before, ventral vagal state, you're able to connect, be present and socialise. You might go up and down, actually, depending on the circumstances. So it's like an elevator through the vagus nerve. The brain is always giving those signals to you. You have to understand the brain-body system first, then the sort of theories around that and why you might be experiencing disconnection or openness, hyposensitivity or hypersensitivity, Once you've got those bits, then you can try and dig deeper and find out where it all begins. And that's when we find out about the parts and the abilities and the intelligence and all of those things.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? So, like, I could genuinely listen to you talk about this stuff all day. And I think, social media gets a bit of stick, probably justifiably, for so many different reasons, and so much we won't go into. I guess one of the good things that come out of it is there are people like you have a platform that maybe wouldn't have existed 20 years ago,
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah.
And then people can find out about these subjects that they would never even have thought to have sought out before as well. And that's incredible. So for people listening to this, where can they find you, receive your content, and then reach out to you if they want to? Where's the best place to get in touch with you?
So all good stuff is on
Where's
Instagram.
the bad stuff?
Yeah, the bad stuff is hidden. I shan't admit that. But all the good stuff is at Ella McCrystal on Instagram. And then from there, all the links to everything else can be found in the bio. Link in bio. That's the cheesiest phrase of all time. Link in bio.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been like really different for us, and probably more so for me than Matt, who's had some experience with this subject before, but I found it really fascinating. Some of those things that you've said have made me think about things in a different way as well. And hopefully, and I'm sure that people listening will have taken different parts that relate to them, and then that resonates with them as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have a closing tradition.
Oh Christ, yeah, I was going to forget.
So it shows you how good it's been that he's forgotten.
Do you know
the
what? That's a really good point. I
tradition.
totally forgot about that.
And I haven't mentioned what that is. So, do you want to?
All right, okay. So it's ridiculous, and it always ends on just a ridiculous note.
It's a bit of a damp squib. It's like my story earlier that I finished.
That was a dreadful story, although it did involve chocolates.
No, exactly.
That's all we'll say.
Yeah, anyway.
So our podcast is called Property Porn Stars, and our typical guests are people that are stars of what you class as property porn, so all the big houses. However, everyone has a porn star name, whether they know it or not, and it's comprised of a middle name and your first pet's name.
Okay.
And just while you're thinking of what yours is, to my eternal frustration, we did our pilot episode, just me and Matt, and he said his, which is Kevin Tiny, and no one's managed to beat how ridiculous that is.
Not what I'm proud of.
So,
No, that's probably the worst.
It is.
it's so bad it's good,
Yeah,
and therefore it stays at the top, which is just infuriating.
Yeah.
Can you come up with something that's going to beat that?
No, I can't. But it
No
is,
one has so far, so don't
it's
beat
horrendous. It's horrendous. It's France's ginger.
Oh, I think that's actually that. You haven't obviously listened to as many episodes to know some of the poor contenders that we've had. That's definitely up there in the top.
Is it quite classy comparatively?
It's fairly classy.
Well, it's certainly classier than Kevin Tiny.
Ginger's good as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, France's ginger. It just feels like, what's the point, really? It doesn't say anything about the type of porn star I'd be.
I think something.
We might need to. On that note, I want to say thank you for showing up and just providing loads of value today. So if you're listening, watching, make sure you follow Ella on her journey as well.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, Ella, and thank you everyone who's listened to and watched this episode of Property Porn Stars. We'll catch you in the next episode.
See you soon.